Well, hi everyone. True pleasure to be here today, and super excited about the Czech User Group here. It's been quite some time since I had the opportunity to come and visit, and I guess these days it's not becoming easier. But maybe next year we'll finally have the chance to revisit again the in-person events. I thought a good topic, as always, could be a little bit on the Veeam Certified Engineer, or most of this actually would be relevant on passing exams in general. Now, some of you I might have had the fortunate chance to meet already, some of you maybe not. So let me just briefly introduce myself. My name is Rasmus, and thank you, Karel, for the invite and the introduction. I've been working at Veeam since 2016. Before that, I had the chance to work as a partner, at a distributor, as a customer. So I feel like maybe I should leave Veeam, join some alliance partner, and then come back to you so I can say I've been full circle here. But anyway, let's hop right into the content here. So the different items I've prepared for you today is going to be a lot centered on exams in general, but also, of course, this is the Veeam User Group, so of course the Veeam exam as well specifically. So I'll start off by talking a little bit about multiple choice questions, some tips and tricks here, maybe some things you thought about, maybe you didn't. So hopefully you can avoid some of these pitfalls when you sit your next exam. We'll talk about some VMCE exam specific tips, some tools that you can use for studying. I'll try and make sure we include some examples here as well. Then I've prepared a little sample question that we can talk about a little bit. And well, how do you actually pass the exam? Well, you have to go and actually sit the exam. Nobody ever got certified by just sitting there and thinking about it. So we'll talk a little bit about the actual test center, which I think some of you have probably already tried with maybe Veeam or a different vendor. And then there's a new online proctoring option that some of us might have tried, some of us may have not. And then, of course, I've added in some Q&A time right there at the end. All right, so first of all, we have these multiple choice exams, and I think a very common issue over the years I've noticed, having to talk to different, otherwise very nice people who had issues passing the exam, who were sometimes complaining that there was errors on the exam and things like that. I think the first very, very important piece of advice I can give is make sure that you really, really read the question. So if we take a little look here at the text I've put in here, you might sort of brain-wise go through all of this and everything seems good. But then as we start to get towards the end, you suddenly realize, oh, hey, there's something funky here. And I didn't even notice it when I was reading the text. You've probably seen these sort of funny things on social media with some text where everything is sort of misspelled, but the first letter and the last letter is still correct. And this allows our brains to somehow compensate a little bit here so that we don't really run into some issues reading the text. So somehow the brain is working overtime and it makes it work still. So how does this work on the exam then? Well, I would say one very common misfortune is, and I've been guilty of this myself as well, is that we sort of rush through the questions a little bit. And if you don't know what the question really is before you go down and select an answer, well, then it's very easy to make some, should I say, unnecessary error here, right? You have to make sure you know what you're answering before you actually go and pick it. So make sure that you truly understand every single question that you're being asked before you go and select the right answer. The next item I've put in is what I could probably ask you here. And since we have the chat here, let me know in the chat here. Has anyone ever experienced déjà vu? And I guess a fair question would be to say, well, hey, what is déjà vu? Well, it's essentially when you know you've already experienced this bullshit before, because for some exams, right, you have someone writing the exam and they are really trying to trick you. Thankfully, most professional exams are sort of moving away from these trick questions, but it still happens. And the truth is, when someone's writing an exam question, okay, they have to make some question, right? Then they have to come up with the right answer. Well, that part shouldn't be so difficult. But then they also have to make the wrong answers, or what's also more commonly called distractors. And these should not really be trick answers. But it should still be something that's appealing to the person, right? That's why it's a distractor. We want to distract you with this answer here. So my suggestion, when you get to the questions, some people have varying strategies here. Some people, they go straight down to the answer options. They read all of the answer options, and then they go up to the question and start reading. I wouldn't say this is a bad strategy at all, especially not if it's sort of a scenario question. Sometimes some of you have taken vendor exams where they give you some very, very long list of information, and then you have to use this sort of these case study type questions. Then this is maybe more time relevant to do it this way. But if it's sort of question by question by question, I would really recommend try and almost sort of block out the answer options. Try to really not even look at the possible answers that you can select. Look at the question. Follow the advice from before. Make sure that you really understand the question that's being asked. And then in your head, think about what do you think is the right answer. Now I know sometimes this can be a little bit distracting, but it's something that becomes easier and easier the more we try and practice it. Once you have an idea in your head what the right answer is, then go down and start looking at these answer options here. So what would the first step be? Then we'll basically look at the answer options and try and find the one that's the closest to the answer option that you already in your head decided should be the correct one, and then probably pick that one. Once you've done that, then start checking the other ones just to make sure that there's not one of these that is actually a better answer than the one you had initially picked. Maybe because they have some additional information or something like that. Some of you might already have sort of a strategy here that says, hey, picking the longest answer option could be a good idea. And to be honest, maybe there's some truth here. And I would say there's realistically two reasons for this. When you have to write the right answer, you have to make sure it's absolutely correct. So people writing exam answers might be tempted to put in a lot of extra details, so this answer is getting longer. Over time, I would say most vendors sort of realize that this is becoming a common strategy. So some people are purposely writing long answer options that are wrong. Like they didn't even write the right one answer yet, they make a long one. So be careful with the strategy here. But if you're looking at the answer options, it's something to maybe keep in mind here. Now, what if we try and make a little exercise here? Because no one sort of interacted in the chat there before. And hey, I know it's in the morning here, but why don't we give it a little try here? So I've set up a system here using something called Slido. You can take your trusty phone, open the camera app and just scan the QR code there. Or you could join using your browser there at slido.com. And then once we have a few people here, we have Mr. John Doe. That was me when I was doing a little testing. Let's see if we can get some people to join in here. We'll have a little quiz question. Okay, Michael joined in, thank you. Don't be shy. It's not going to be something crazy that I'll ask you about. Okay. A few more people. Ah, great. Here we go. Now we're getting some people in. I like it. Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds. Maybe still a few still connecting in or something. And then we'll... there'll be more items inside, so it's not like you're missing completely out here. All right, well, thank you so much to those of you who joined and who are still joining in on Slido here. So if we try and take a look at this question here, and if you've never watched Harry Potter at all, fair enough, then you can sort of just throw a dart. We'll have more questions and polls that are coming up, but try and take a look at this. Try and think back. Which one do you think is the correct answer here? And you might be thinking, what? Harry Potter in the morning, and this was supposed to be a Veeam User Group, but bear with me. There's some relevancy here. All right, awesome. Okay, so if we take a look here, we see actually, not too surprisingly, a lot of you picked the answer. He accidentally does magic. And this is completely true, right? In the movie, right, he does accidentally do magic, but he doesn't learn that he doesn't know he's a wizard, right? Just because you can do something that's a little bit strange, you don't really understand what's happening, doesn't mean that you're like, oh my goodness, okay, I was able to do something, I must be a wizard. So it's actually not until later when Hagrid actually tells him that he's a wizard. The problem here is that if we really know Harry Potter trivia here, okay, then we know the correct answer is D. But if we think back to the two other options, or actually I guess that was 3, but choices, the second one and the third one are B or C, those were quite tempting, I think, for most people, because they were things that actually happened in the story, right? So Harry does accidentally go and do magic, but he doesn't know that he's a wizard. He's pretty much just confused. And then we have these owls, right? They are actually trying to deliver these Hogwarts letters down to Harry, but they get intercepted, right, by Vernon. Now, I'll stop with the Harry Potter talking here, but the point is, if you're rushing through these multiple choice questions, it's very easy for your brain to see something that you remember. Maybe it was from a presentation by a fantastic Veeam trainer in the Czech Republic, or maybe it was a fantastic VMware trainer in Czech Republic, who knows? But it could also be that you're reading in the textbook, or maybe you've been watching some videos, or you did something in the lab, right? And because you remember that something happened, you immediately say, okay, yeah. This is a little bit dangerous, because then what we saw before can quite easily happen. Now, when you take these exams, the possibilities for what the system allows are a little bit different. Sometimes you can actually right-click on the answer options and then they get crossed out. I think it depends a little bit on the exact system and vendor and which options have been allowed. But if you can use this, I would strongly suggest using it. So if you can't, then you'll have to sort of mentally go and think, which ones do I 100% know is not correct? Yeah, then make sure that that's basically eliminated. So most exams these days will have 4 or 5 answer options. So if you can get with a 4 answer exam where you're not really sure what the right answer is, but you can figure out, okay, well, A must be wrong. Okay, and C must be wrong. Well, even if you're just guessing, you're already down to a 50-50 chance. Right? So your actual chances are starting to increase quite a lot, I would say. So this is definitely something to keep in mind here. And then we come back to these long answer options. If you're left with two answers and you have no idea which one it is, you might be tempted to take that long one. And I know I said, be careful. Actually, research shows that approximately 52% of the time, the long ones are the correct answer if you're down to a 50-50 situation. So if you don't know, maybe, and you have just two answers left, maybe actually going with the long one is not such a bad idea after all. Okay, if we try and make this a little bit more VMC exam specific, what could we do? What could we do? So you've been on the training, you had the best possible trainer right there available to you. What are the next steps? Well, first of all, there's a lot you can do. And even before we start getting to the study guide here, the official study guide, and I put a QR code here, and just in case someone doesn't have it. I mean, there's always these links, these long links that are somehow not working. So I thought, let me try and go with the QR codes this time. Before you potentially go here, maybe try and think, what's my journey with Veeam or with the vendor that you're taking the exam for? So for example, for Veeam, I've been working with this for many different versions of the product. And while this definitely is helpful because it gives me a good background, because many things don't change, but small things are changing here and there. And so the problem is something that was a limitation, something that you couldn't do, it could change over time. So suddenly it is possible to do it. So how do you figure out? How do you know? Well, of course, you could sit down and go through every single feature, line item by line item, but this is maybe a little bit time consuming. Well, I would say the first approach is to try and keep up with the release notes. So since we're talking about Veeam here, if I took the 9.5 exam, for example, now I'm looking to take the version 10 exam or 2020 exam, well then obviously looking to the version 10 release notes to figure out, well, what really changed. Could also be the what's new PDF. That's also a great resource. So once you've sort of gotten through all of these, there's also some feature overviews that you could go through and take a closer look at. There's a lot of good content. And I'll provide some links that you can take a closer look at. Well, then I would say this official study guide would probably be the next step. And you're thinking, oh, how come there's a traffic light here? The truth is, when we start looking through these traffic lights, or should I say study guides, using a traffic light approach can be quite helpful because you get to some big documents and it basically looks something like this. And this is just one section or one piece of it. It's a very long PDF. How do you really start processing all of this? Well, personally, regardless if it's the VMC exam or if it's a AWS exam or a VMware exam or whatever it is, if there's a blueprint or an exam guide, I want to get it printed out. I'm old school like that. I have the printer sitting right next to me here. And then I get out my 3 markers as per the traffic light here. And then I'll start marking up. And the system I suggest using here is, can you go and do this in the lab? And do you know how it works? So, and when I say go and do it in the lab, what I mean is not go to some lab system where the instructions are there, or open up the book and then it's like, okay, well, line number 1, click here. Okay, line number 2, click there. Line 3, type this. No. Like close the book, put it on the side, like close the window with the instructions. And if I told you, I want you to go and set this up, I want you to go and do so and so, can you actually do that without anything else than just the end result that you should achieve? If the answer is no, then I would not mark it green. Then we're probably at a yellow. But the next question then is, if you also don't really understand how it works, it's probably not a yellow, then it's a red. Right? I couldn't do it because I don't understand how it works. If you don't understand how it works really, but you could do it in the lab because it's more of a configuration thing, I guess you could still put on yellow. It's more to try and give you an idea what do you need to work on? If it's green, well, it should be done already. There shouldn't really be much for you to work on. So if we try and zoom in a little bit here to make it more specific, then we take a look and we see this, for example, failback. Okay, so if I talk about the failback, well, how does it really work? Like, do I have some idea? Maybe you don't remember every single step because there's a lot of steps. And here I'm not so much thinking about doing it in the software because clicking, okay, done. This is not so difficult if you know which window to go to. But how does it really work? What really happens? What are some of the steps that will be taken? Is there something that has to be done before we start doing it? So the real question then is, how does it work? Now, some of you might remember, some of you might not. So I thought maybe we should throw in a slide here just to sort of take a look. And I'll poke my head down to the side for a moment here. So you can see down there, it's a snapshot. So when we do the failback, and just to make sure everyone's in the right context here, right? We've set up a replication job. I've been replicating from my production original VM to some other host. Maybe it's on the same site, but probably a different site. And I've already done a failover. So it's now running from the replica. Probably there was some sort of problem on the original location, and I'm looking to bring the machine back because that problem has been fixed. Now it says here if the original VM is running, it will be powered off. Well, why should it suddenly be running? Maybe that's a good question already right there. Any ideas? Why could the original VM be still running? Let's say it was not running, then I did the failover, suddenly it's running again. What could be causing that? Any ideas? You can send me a private message if you're a little bit shy, but you still want to guess. That's okay. So there's a message here, okay. Yeah, perfect answer, exactly. It could be because the system was down, right? And then it came back up, and for example, because of the power. And now, for example, vSphere HA starts all of these machines up again. That would make perfect sense. So when we do the failback, the first thing that will happen is it actually gets powered off. Then it creates this working failback snapshot on the original VM. The next question could be, well, why does it do that? Well, because that's how we actually get these differencing blocks transferred over. We have some more steps, then we power off the VM replica. It's left powered off, and then we create this failback protective snapshot that I put down there on the bottom of the slide, on the replica, not on the original VM. And this actually takes us to the next real question here that I'd like to see you, and you can type in some free text answer here. So what really happens to this protective snapshot when we then do a commit failback? Because again, performing the commit failback, that's as easy as right-clicking and selecting commit failback, and we're pretty much done. But what kind of outcome do we get from this? And to make it more specific, let's say what happens with this protective snapshot on the target replica, right? Because that's the one we're talking about. Will it be left behind? Will it get cleaned up? Do we do something with it? Can we use it for anything? Any ideas? Cleaned up? Definitely that could be a logical answer. Snapshot will be deleted. Yeah, that's pretty much the same, right? So what if we think about this for a moment? Let's say you've been running on this replica. Then you do the failback. So now we have the virtual machine on the replica side is basically the latest possible state, right? Because that's the machine we've been running on so far, because we did the failover, right? So I'm running over here on the replica. When we do the failback, we learned that the replica will be powered off as a part of that process. When we didn't do the commit failback, truly what's the interesting part here is we have all of this data here. And in reality, we basically want to make sure that when we do the commit failback, the replication job starts running again so that I have a chance to do a failover later on. So I see someone put in the copy to original VM. So that actually happens at a little bit during the failback, right? Not during the commit failback, but that's okay. There's a lot of moving parts here, and I think I'm looking virtually over at Karel here, and I know he does a fantastic job with the slides on the replication failover and failback, but those are quite tricky to actually present, because there's like you go back and forth, and then you can undo and not undo and so on. So we actually leave it behind. Yeah, and what that means is when the replication job starts running again, this protective snapshot is essentially converted, you could say, into being a additional restore point, so that we can start replicating on top again. The point here being is just something could be quite easy in the lab to do, but actually knowing how it works. And you might think, well, this is why, like, how could this possibly come up on the exam? Well, I would say it could be something like, hey, you basically have this replication job, it's running. Currently, there are, let's say, 30 restore points. The maximum you specified in the job is 30 restore points. They've performed a failover, a failback, and a commit failback. How many restore points will there be now? But then you might even have to think, oh, okay, well, will it then go and remove some of these, or will it not? Well, you know what? Sometimes the way to answer something like this, and of course you can't do this during the exam, right? Because during the exam you can only use what you have in your head. But you could go to the documentation. Personally, I'm a big fan of the user guide. I think it's fantastic. I mean, I don't want to sit here and like say, hey, Veeam is doing a great job. But I really think the documentation is really, really good. It's very, very detailed, and it's very up to date. Don't forget, at the bottom, there's always a send feedback button. So if something is unclear, if you feel something is missing, you can always go to a certain page, click that button, it opens up an email, type in what's the question, and so on. This is not support, of course, right? So it needs to be specific to what you see in the documentation. But my point being is, if you went into a lab environment and tried this to find out how many restore points there would be, it would not actually take that much time, probably a lot less time than it would take to go and try and read the answer. So try and think. Sometimes answering a question could be a lot faster to just try it than to actually go and read. And this leads me right into the second tool, so to say, which is praxis exams. And I put them in this order specifically on purpose, because it's important to really understand, how do you learn? And there's a lot of online resources here. Very generally, I'll say some people are what we could call auditory learners, right? So they like to sit there, they just listen to someone present sort of what I'm doing right now, and this is how you remember something. Maybe you're taking a lot of notes along the way during some training, for example. And that's great. Other people might be very visual learners. So this is where, again, you might be fortunate to have someone like Karel, who's fantastic at whiteboarding, who'll be doing a lot of whiteboarding during the trainings. I love whiteboarding as well. So actually seeing someone drawing all of this stuff out, very visual, this personally helps me a lot. Maybe it doesn't help you. but understanding if it's helpful for you or not also helps you decide how are you going to learn. The last one is what we call the kinesthetic learner, which is basically hands-on learning. So actually doing something. For me, this is the best possible learning way. And that's just my personal way. Not because it's the best way, it's just for me and the way I learn, it's the best way. But it might not be the best for you. And you can see this because if I'm as a student in a training, you'll see I'm the guy who's asking a million questions. And sometimes some people get upset about that. And then when we're doing the labs, I have no questions at all. But that's because during the lecturing piece, I might be struggling a little bit, especially if it's someone who doesn't do any visual things. And then when we get to the labs, I'm like, oh, finally now I can really start trying it out. And as soon as I've done it, it really starts sticking in my head. So why did I say all of that when the slide talks about the practice exams? Well, because do the studying and at least try and do this traffic light before you go to the practice exams. Because the number one misuse, should I say, of practice exams that I've seen over the years is someone potentially took a training. Maybe the training is not even finished and they're using the practice exam now. And it's not that this is necessarily a bad thing. The problem is the more times you see these questions over and over and over, I can see this from the statistics on my own blog for how long people are spending. Sometimes they're like, so like there's a lot of text on some of those questions. There's no way someone could have read the question, all of it, and then gone down and selected the right answer. But I've purposely tried to make answer options where you have to read the text. The problem being, they've already read it and memorized what the correct answer is. So they are not even reading anything. They just go down, they see, that's the right one, select, go to the next one. Okay, I can guarantee you right now, the questions you see on the practice exam, unless we're talking about a brain dump, of course, yeah, because then it could be actual real questions, most likely. If you're lucky, I guess they haven't been removed from the real exam. If you're unlucky, they have been removed, and then it doesn't help you at all. But that's another story. I'll maybe come back to that. So try and make sure that you have some idea of your level before at least you start going to the practice exam. Because then when you have your little document with the different traffic light coloring, try and map that to what you see on the practice exam. Did you have something unexpected? Maybe you thought you knew everything about replication or failovers and failbacks, and suddenly you're having problems with these questions. Okay, well, that's good to know, right? Because then that means you might have to change that from, let's say, green to yellow or yellow to red, which helps you get some idea how much time do you need to spend on this. The next part you could almost say here is when you've gone through the practice exam, try maybe and think a little bit of a blank piece of paper and your daily work with the product. Because ideally, all different aspects of the product should be tested, be it backups for Hyper-V or backups for VMware or Veeam One or tape backups or backup from storage snapshots. And you could say, well, I'm not a Hyper-V customer, or I'm not a VMware customer, so why should I learn about that? Well, if you're only learning to have knowledge that you can use in your daily life, then I would say there's no reason to do that. But if you're trying to learn to go and pass the certification exam, well, then it's not really fair that the exam has to be tailored to one specific person, right? It should be testing a little bit on everything, which means if you think about it and say, well, I don't even have any experience with Veeam and Hyper-V, and I actually didn't even try to do the lab exercise. I didn't even try anything inside the environment. Well, that's a chunk of the paper where you can say, hey, this is questions I should expect to fail unless I'm doing lucky guesses. And then you scratch off a little area for tape, you scratch off a little area for backup from storage snapshots because maybe you don't have the license to use it, maybe you just don't have an array that supports it, whatever it could be, right? Maybe it's Veeam 1, well, we use a management pack instead. Okay, well, fair enough, but then if there's a question about Veeam 1, you might have difficulty in answering those. I put a QR code here, and this is shameless self-promotion right here. It will actually take you to my blog. On the blog, you'll find 3 different practice exams. The one, I think some of you might have seen already, it's called option number 2. It's the sort of older practice exam that I created quite a few years back. I've gone through all of the questions. Some of them had to be replaced, but they've all been updated for version 10. Then there's a link to the official practice exam, which is different. So some of you may have seen the old version 9 official practice exam. That one was very, very easy. The new one, I wouldn't say it's difficult or easy. All of the questions were questions that were written for the real exam, but for different reasons they were taken out of the real pool. Maybe we thought they were a little bit too easy, or there was other questions that were too similar and we didn't want to have like duplicates almost. So maybe there's some small nuances at least, which brings me back to the part that I mentioned earlier. Make sure you really read the questions. The third one, which is actually option 1, is a completely new one. And that one aligns a lot to the way the real VMCE exam works right now, meaning it's scenario questions. So the answer options could change a little bit based on the information you got up in the actual question. And it's not really testing memorization, but rather you will go into some environment and do something. What will happen? Do you have some idea what will happen? And I think this is where, if you understand why is this the right answer and why are these other answers not correct, even if the question is not going to come up on the real exam, which it hopefully will not, then you have gained knowledge, or you already had knowledge if you knew the answer already, that you can apply to other questions, which you will see on the real exam. And I think this is where it's key. But if you're just sort of plowing through it, you've memorized the whole thing, it means you've probably taken it too many times. Maybe you started using it a little bit too early. So be careful with that. And as mentioned, maybe avoid using the dumps, because in the end, what is it that you want to get out of this? If you just want a nice piece of paper here with the epic win that you can put on the wall, fair enough. I guess using dumps is a possible option. Just be careful. A lot of times the people who are selling these things, they don't really care about you. They just care about your money. So while they may have illegitimately gained these questions, a lot of the time they didn't spend any time at all figuring out what the right answer is. So what they mark as the correct answer could be completely wrong. And so if you just memorize that, you'll probably end up horribly failing the right exam, which means you have to spend a lot of time into studying. So why not just do that from the beginning and then do it the right way? So hey, I actually put in the time. I've learned something. If I go to my own environment as a customer, or if you're a partner, you go to your customer's environments, you can say something with confidence because you know what you're talking about. And you have the document with the epic win to prove it. Now, with all of this talk, maybe we should take a little bit of a sample question here to see what could one of these look like. So let's see it says 16 up there. So I think a lot of you might have kept the Slido open. If you didn't, you still have a chance to hop in right here. Maybe someone can give me a little hint in the chat there if you're still connected, since it only says get ready and not any names. Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate that. I assume that's what it meant with the 16 still. All right, so let's take a look at this question here, and I'll give you some time to actually take a closer look. The bottom word I'm blocking there is patch. Okay, I see the first answer came in. Thank you for that. Let's see if we can get a few more people to put a reply in. There's a lot of text to read, so I don't want to rush anyone. Originally, the text was a little bit longer. I had to, unfortunately, shorten it a little bit to make it fit the format here. Hopefully that didn't kill it too much. 5 answers in, 6. Okay, it's starting to accelerate. Oh, good stuff, good stuff. Okay, well, maybe we should take a little look here and see. Okay, so if we take a look at the question at the top, right? So we have a customer who is noticing network issues on some standalone host and request a failover. So we take all of these virtual machines and we fail them over to a different standalone host. And we have the replication job already setting up. It appears to work, right? But then we start to get reports of these machine name conflicts. So this is where some possible thinking could be done. But it's also important to understand what happens when you do a failover. A good question would be to say, if the original VM is powered on, which it of course was, and I do a failover, what happens to the original VM? Will Veeam go and power it off, or will it continue running? Obviously, we assume that Veeam is able to talk to the host. Let's say Veeam was able to talk to the host. Regardless, Veeam backup and replication at least would not go and power off that machine. And that little piece of information is definitely helpful, because if we go down and see here, there's an answer option here at the bottom here, known issue, nobody got distracted by that. Then we have the after failover has been executed, sysprep must be performed. Thankfully, no. I guess you might have to do a re-IP if it's like a different location and it's not a stretched network. And then we would not have IP conflicts. Probably also not machine name conflicts, because they're not in the same subnet. But yeah, we did the sysprep. We don't need to do that. If you sat in one of the classes and you did the failover, hopefully you had a chance to give that a try as well. Replica host is also experiencing network issues, so nobody fell for that, right? Why? So you have 2 places that are having problems on the network. Clearly that shouldn't cause us to have machine name conflicts. But then we're left with these 2 here. After failover has been executed, a permanent failover must also be performed. Okay, well, actually, when you do the permanent failover, it doesn't really do that much other than clean up the snapshots on that replica. So now in essence, it's the production machine. But again, what if that original host that was sort of offline networking wise, so comes back up? Well, that machine could still be running. The original VM is also added as a exclusion to the replication job, so it won't try and replicate it again, of course. Which leaves us with this top one here, that realistically what happened is the virtual machine was never powered off, and it's now back on the network. And because it's back on the network, we start to see these name conflicts. So I'm talking a lot about replication here, but it was just to try and make sort of a story that we could use as a, should I say, red thread almost as we went through here. And in case you were curious, the top one was the correct answer for this one here. Oh, there was even a little here leaderboard. I actually didn't realize I was going to put that there, but well done anyway. So what about the actual selection when it's time to do the exam? Now, I'm going to assume most of us as IT professionals have probably sat an exam at a test center, be it maybe an old Prometric test center or Pearson VUE, because there's a lot of IT vendors, right? But these days, you could go, of course, and still take the exam at a test center. I'm not sure what the current condition is in the Czech Republic, if they are allowed to go there and take them or not. So, for example, in Denmark, I quite recently myself went to sit and take an exam. But in the old times, I would just go and schedule it through the online booking system. You could see all of the test centers. I would pick one, pick the right time, and so on. These days, I wasn't allowed to do that. I had to call the test center, and they had to book it. So they basically then wait until the day that you want to do the exam, and then they schedule it, because that way they can control how many people are there and the seats and so on. So basically, I think this is their way of controlling if the rules of distancing and so on suddenly changes, they can control it. The next option these days for most vendors is also that you can do remote or online proctoring. And let me know in the chat here if you've actually tried one of these online remote proctored exams. If you haven't tried it and you'd like to try it, well then of course one option is to actually go and sit the exam, which is maybe not the best way to test something. But I put a little QR code here, and the QR code takes you to the Pearson VUE system check. And the system check is actually available regardless if you have a exam booked or not. So anyone can go whenever they want and perform this system check. And what it does is it will download a little piece of software on your computer. You run that, and then it will start checking if you have some, should I say, unauthorized software running on your computer. So I put a little screenshot here. This is just random stuff I had running on my computer when I ran it. And you can see it's complaining about the browser lock here because I have Microsoft Teams running, I had the Task Manager running, I had Skype running and Slack running. Now, I didn't spend a lot of time to try and see if I could trick the system somehow, but it seems like the main thing it's checking is for certain pieces of software, but also down in the bottom of your screen where you have the Windows taskbar, you can only have one window that's actually open. You normally see there's like an underlining of that. But there's a lot of rules, like for example, some people like to sit in a test room and read the questions out loud. I would say this only works if you're the only person in the test room. But when you're doing online proctoring, you're not allowed to do that. And my guess is that they're worried somehow that you're reading out loud, so someone on the other side of the door could be writing them down perhaps. It's just my personal guess. I actually don't know why. The second part is when you're doing a normal exam in a test center, you get some laminated piece of paper that you can take notes on, right? You don't have that available to you during the online proctoring, which means you are not allowed to have anything that you can write with or on. And so no note taking during the exam. So if you're someone who does a lot of that, maybe be careful with this. Maybe it's better to wait until you can go and actually sit the exam, because it's important again to remember how you're learning, how do you perform best when you're taking these exams. Now, once you've sort of gone through this process, you will also see this second test, where it's checking your internet speed. I know in the Czech Republic you have great internet connections, maybe in Slovakia as well. I'm not sure. Let me know in the chat there what kind of internet speed you're on right now. You don't have to run a speed, that's just sort of your estimated speed. But it seems it doesn't really need that much bandwidth. Then there's a webcam, and I kind of purposely cropped out the photo just in case someone else decides to recycle this presentation. And then there's the microphone. And actually, this was just using the laptop microphone, and it failed the test. I spent quite some time to try and understand what the issue was. Never managed to find out because I did some testing with various stuff, and the microphone was working completely fine. The software just did not want to accept that specific microphone. If I used a different one, like from a headset, plugged in, or from USB, perfect, it was happy to use it. So not sure exactly what the issue was there. The point is just, you don't want this kind of stress on the actual day where you're taking your exam, right? So I would suggest, even before you go and book your exam, run the system check on the computer that you want to run it on, but also make sure that you check this list of requirements of Pearson VUE. Like, for example, if you put yourself in a room at work, for example, if that's an option, maybe you use a meeting room. Make sure no one goes into the room, because if someone opens the door, they see, oh, and then they close the door. If the guy from Pearson VUE saw this or heard this, immediately your exam will be aborted and you will have a failed score. It's just not allowed. No one can go into a room. They can't even open the door a little bit. So ideally, you would basically lock yourself into the room so no mistakes like that can happen. If there's some glass you have to put some curtains there or something. So there's a lot of requirements. And personally, I think it's fantastic that the option is there, but just sort of realize that it's not exactly the same as when you go and sit in a, should I say, normal or usual test center at least. Now I look at the time and I see we're sort of coming up at the top of the hour here. So I put in a little bit of a Q&A option here. You can use the same system as before, and I think I'll have a chance to see once they pop in here. If there are some, you can also just put them in the chat. That's also completely fine. I'll be happy to field any questions. If you think of some questions afterward, you can always reach out to me on Twitter at Haslund. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn if you're interested in that. It's always great to see who's interested in connecting. Now, it doesn't seem like yet any questions came in, but that's okay. In that case, I'll just once again say thank you to the Veeam User Group. Thank you, Carol, for the invitation, and thank you for spending the time to listen to me rant on for basically 1 hour. If I could make one last request, I would say if you already passed your VMC exam, tell us about it in the chat. If you didn't, but you're looking to become VMC certified, let us know in the chat. Right, and just curious to see. Thank you all.